Welcome to Taking the Higher Road, a DriverReach and FreightWaves production. I'm your host, Jeremy Reymer, founder and CEO of DriverReach, a modern recruiting and compliance software solution. On this show, I interview industry experts and thought leaders who bring their insights to the driver lifecycle as we discuss the industry's greatest challenges, driver recruiting, retention, and compliance. I appreciate all the positive feedback on the show. Please remember to rate and review Taking the Higher Road, whatever platform you use to listen. This week, I'm honored to have back on the show one of my very best friends in the industry, Hayden Cardiff, Chief Innovation Officer and founder of Idelic, who happens to be one of DriverReach's strongest integrated partners as well. So glad to have you back on the show, Hayden.
Absolutely, Jeremy. Thank you so much for having me.
You help fleets reduce their total cost of risk, by implementing Idelic's Safety Suite platform. I'd love to unpack how, especially in this current climate, Idelic is a valuable investment, in safety and compliance. I'd love to learn how you've leveraged technology through artificial intelligence, machine learning, to supercharge driver coaching. And I want to be sure we discuss what's new at Idelic, especially since the last time you were on the show we recorded live at Idelic's user conference in Pittsburgh last year.
We sure did.
Yeah. And then lastly, I want to make sure that we save time for a question from a listener during our deeper dive segment. Think we can knock that out today?
I think we can. We'll give it a shot.
All right. Well, before we dive in there, I'm curious, as is the custom, if you have any book recommendations for the audience, anything that you've read that was impactful to you.
Oh man, that's a great question. But one of the best that I've kind of taken a liking to is from a really good friend and industry leader, Brian Fielko, Leading People Safely. If you haven't read that, please check it out. It's a fantastic read. And very astute observations and insights from a practical standpoint of how to actually go in and get buy-in throughout the entire organization to proceed.
And how appropriate, since we're talking about safety and compliance. Brian Fielko is a great friend and a great industry advocate and ambassador for safety and compliance. And I don't think it gets much better when you're talking about somebody at the top, right? The former CEO of Jetco Delivery who absolutely invested in safety and compliance top down. And it's a great book. And he's got at least 2 books. So if you read Leading People Safety and you like that, you read the rest, because
he's great.
He's a class act and a great friend. So fun fact, before we we're talking right now, you are in Brazil. Right?
Yes, actually I am. So my wife is from here, and so we are been fortunate enough to spend the last couple of months here, spending some time with her family and allowing our kids to better learn Portuguese and hopefully be able to speak with their grandparents and extended family. So it's been a good time.
Well, when I was at the University of Georgia, I had a couple of friends from Brazil so I learned a little bit of Portuguese, but it was always the words that get you in trouble if you say them to somebody who knows what you're saying.
And those are always the first that people tend to learn, right?
Right. So for those who may not be familiar with Idelic's beginnings, maybe I'd ask you to share a little bit about that, because I know the most successful solutions often are created to solve a problem that a company was having, and then realize that solution is something that could benefit all companies. And that was certainly how DriverReach was created, and I believe Idelic as well. So perhaps you can expand on that.
Absolutely. So we are very proud of our beginnings. Being able to come from the trucking industry is an important thing for us, and especially for our customers. And so I was actually working as a consultant for several trucking fleets. One in particular is Pitt Ohio Express, and identified a couple key areas that they had me look into around better improving visibility into their drivers, understanding and integrating and tying in all the different pieces of data around this driver to be more proactive and predictive. And the biggest piece that I started to understand and see was that no one had a really good solution for using all of the data that fleets have. And there's so much data now, right? Coming off of so many different systems. None of that is tied together. It's all disparate. It's and doesn't speak to one another. But we're all liable for that data, right? From a litigation standpoint, we're liable for it. And no one had a good way of using that data proactively and predictively to understand which drivers at risk, to then gain buy-in from the drivers, to then be able to go in and actually coach to actually change behavior. And so that was an issue that as I started to dig in and talk to anyone and everyone I could, spoke to, over 70, 80 fleets of small, 15, 20 driver fleets, all the way up to quite literally UPS. And everyone across the board had the same issues. And they did not have a good solution to be able to use the data that was available to them, that they were liable for, to be proactive, predictive, and help with the coaching piece. So that was an area that we saw was a huge need across the board. And so we jumped in to try to solve for it. And that's kind of where the humble beginnings of Idelic sprang. And so we actually spun out of Pitt Ohio Express, which was a huge benefit for us in having that industry knowledge and a fantastic insight from that group, who's one of the best when it comes to safety and risk management in the country. 7-time ATA President's Trophy winning fleet. So really, really good group of people to kind of help bounce ideas off of and be able to ultimately take and run with the concept of Idelic on our own.
Yeah, that's exciting. And they're right there in Pittsburgh also, right? So that's a great incubator almost, for you.
That's exactly right. And again, like being, built from a trucking company for a trucking company is incredibly important. Starting with an understanding of the actual issue and challenge you're trying to solve for, much better than just trying to take technology and find a problem to solve, but rather to have a problem that needs solving and then find a creative and innovative solution through technology to help with.
Yeah, the good news is, one, I love that you said proactive and predictive, and we'll unpack that here shortly, but I know the trucking industry specifically is a little behind when it comes to embracing technology. Not everyone, obviously, but overall, compared to other not larger industries, but certainly other industries that are maybe more progressive or innovative, we're getting there.
Yeah,
and it's obviously, I think, companies like Idelic are helping to pave the way when it comes to safety and compliance. And I know in the face of rising nuclear verdicts and settlements, as well as increased scrutiny around hiring practices and compliance management, can you just share a little bit about how investing in Idelic actually enables companies to mitigate that risk? Because you could break that down in a number of ways.
Yeah, no, and I think you're spot on, right? And I think the biggest thing that I've started to realize within the trucking industry over the last 8 going on 10 years now is really just around fleets do invest in technology when they see a direct ROI, right? And I think that's the biggest thing. They're not going to just buy technology for technology's sake. They're really focusing on how do they drive operational excellence? How do they really focus in on the ROI and the value? And you mentioned nuclear verdicts. You mentioned rising insurance costs, total cost of risk. Like that whole bucket there is becoming one of the most important line items on the P&L. And I'll tell you why. Like right now in 2023, right, we're seeing some crazy fluctuations in the spot market. We're seeing freight soften. We're seeing it's not 2021, right? Like it is a different market now, and you can't just go grab more drivers, grab more equipment, and run more freight and just make a whole bunch more money. Like that's just not the environment that we're in today. And so with this type of financial environment, fleets have to focus on operational excellence. And what does that mean? They need to find a large, meaningful area of cost and operate more effectively than their peers to create a competitive advantage. And so when you look at the top 4 or 5 line items on that P&L from a cost standpoint, there's really only one that sticks out as something that you can create a competitive advantage with, right? You're not going to, compared to your peer group, you're not going to pay drivers less. You're not going to buy your equipment for less. You're not going to buy fuel for less, right? So you go down that list, there's really only one, which is total cost of risk. Losses, insurance, that bucket of cost is incredibly large. And it is the one area where you can see 50, 80, 100% swings depending on your efficacy compared to your peers. And that is so meaningful in this type of financial situation. We're starting to talk to executives, CFOs, where the resounding understanding throughout the industry started, I can't afford not to invest in improving my total cost of risk. And so that's where for us it has become a really important focus area. How do we help to really home in on that that piece of lowering that total cost of risk so fleets can create that competitive advantage in the marketplace. And so it really starts with understanding the driver, their behavior, and being able to pinpoint who you need to engage with, right? So at Idelic, our focus is helping fleets lower losses and prevent crashes. But to do that, it starts with understanding driver behavior. And like we've talked about before, there's so much data that most fleets are drowning in that you need to be able to tie in and integrate all those different data sources together to then be able to leverage technology like machine learning, predictive analytics, things like that, to understand who those drivers are, why you need to coach them in the first place, and then be able to assign actually effective coaching. And we could talk about that piece because I think there's some important understandings that the industry is starting to learn just around what makes effective coaching as well. So overall, that's kind of the 1-2 punch.
Well, you're applying technology here. You're talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning. That's pretty progressive, for the trucking industry, which is exciting. And if you could share how does Idelic apply, AI and machine learning to not just respond to like risky driver behavior, obviously, but as you said, prevent accidents.
Yeah, I mean, right now you can't turn on the TV, listen to a radio ad, flip on the internet, and read an article without hearing about someone talking about AI, right? Chat GPT, generative AI, like the AI is everywhere, but a lot of that is fairly laden with noise. For us in trucking and transportation, we oftentimes hear AI and cameras and, does your camera have AI? Like you hear a lot about it, but what does it actually boil down to? What does it actually mean? When it comes to understanding driver behavior, it has to be predictive, right? It has to be able to ingest not just camera data, but ELDs, FMCSA, accidents and incidents, driver tenure, demographic, all these different pieces need to get incorporated. There has to be a very large set of data to help you understand and compare from a trend standpoint, and find those patterns of risk. And then you've got to be able to use legitimate machine learning models to be able to understand and kind of predict before any major events happen. So you boil that all down. For us, we really focus on that predictive analytics side. So understanding which drivers are most at risk to get into a crash before that crash happens, right? And leveraging all that data is critical, obviously, so you can get that 360-degree more holistic view of that driver behavior. But for example, like being able to have over, for us, we have over 250,000 individual crashes in our database to be able to compare it. So you have a crash and you look at all the events or behaviors that happened before that, and that's a pattern of risk. And like I said, we have over 250,000 of these patterns that, as on a daily basis, when we're comparing that bank of patterns to driver behavior on a day-to-day basis, we can flag those drivers who are now exhibiting the same patterns. So it's not just a scorecard. It's not just an if-then type of statement or tree. It's really an understanding based on all of that holistic data around your drivers who is going to get into a crash in the near term. And we're finding that we can predict over 60% of preventable crashes with drivers who hit the top of the watch list. And that's a hugely important and significant number and lift for fleets to be able to focus in on the drivers who are most at risk and be able to have the largest impact with the very limited amount of time that we have day to day as safety and risk management professionals.
So you just said watch list. So I assume that's that driver's watch list that sort of sounds like those are the folks that might be exhibiting behavior that's, most predictive towards a crash of some sort.
That's exactly right. And obviously you want to be able to stack rank and compare your entire fleet because you want to be able to understand your best drivers as well, right? And you want to be able to give attaboys and positive reinforcement for good behaviors and good driving patterns as well. But being able to understand and compare and be able to pull out that top 5, 10, 20% of your drivers to say, all right, these are the ones that we want to work with. Again, leveraging technology like this should not be a means to hire fire. It should be a means to understand who to engage with and who to coach. That's the biggest piece of this, right? We are big believers that technology in general, any and all pieces of technology should exist. Effective technology should exist to enhance human engagement and not replace human engagement, right? So being able to take away tasks or data needs to really focus in and enhance the ability for humans to connect and engage, right? Understanding which drivers are most at risk and why, so humans can connect and engage and actually improve driver behavior from that coaching standpoint. That is a very, very important aspect of this whole equation.
So coaching, professional development, all of that, I mean, that kind of leads me to my next question, especially in your experience working with fleets, what have been some of the most common, challenges that they face when it comes to implementing, effective driver coaching programs?
Yeah. So that's a fantastic question. So one of the things that we see very consistently, quite honestly, it's become the industry standard at this point, is from a coaching perspective, I invest in technology with cameras, and then I utilize those cameras to understand, okay, here's my score coming off that camera. So I need to coach every single one of those telematic events coming off that camera, right? I got a driver who has a critical event, overspeed, harsh cornering, lane departure, whatever it is. I see it. It is a critical event. Call a driver, coach him, log him as coached, move on to the next, right? That has become industry standard. And there's a couple reasons for that. I think the biggest reason, when you think about coaching, it really boils down to two things. You want to actually change driver behavior. And two, you want to be able to have a documented trail that you've done the things necessary to do for litigation and liability purposes, right? I am following through with my safety and risk management program, right? So those are the two bases that you're trying to cover. Now, with this style of coaching, it really has been a focal point to coach every single one of these events so that we can cover our bases from a legal standpoint, right? We can show here's all of our coached events and we've done all the things we need to. But the challenge is when you do that and you coach a driver on a specific event, the driver gets incredibly defensive or has the opportunity to get very defensive, right? And that's human nature. Jeremy, if I go to you and say, hey, you did something wrong in this event, it is natural for you to defend your actions in that event because we're debating what happened in this one specific point in time. And that's a challenge. If a driver is defensive, they're not open to change. And so how do you get away from this? How do you move away from that defensive, combative, pull the driver in, slap him on the wrist, call him into the principal's office type mentality? You get away from that by moving away from coaching off of events and moving towards coaching on behaviors. And so when you start to pair this with predictive analytics, for example, you can start to understand, okay, who do I need to coach? But more importantly, the why behind it. I can understand, why do I need to coach? The specific behaviors. So now if a driver's got 47 overspeeds, I don't care about any one in particular event more than another. I care about the pattern that the driver is speeding. Then I can also tie that into a moving violation and maybe a backing accident, all showing that this driver is just going too fast. And so now with that being the case, I can tie in multiple behaviors and events and coach on a singular overarching behavior and say, all right, let's talk about speed management. So now instead of having 5 or 6 individual phone calls about 5 or 6 individual events to this driver, we can now tie that into we can have 2 weeks, 3 weeks professional development plan that actually addresses the root cause, doesn't create that tension and defensiveness from the driver, and allows you to go in before a major event. So now when you're talking to the driver, you can let them know, look, I'm not mad or I'm not upset. I want you to come home safely each night. You're a professional driver. It is our job to to make sure that you are coming home safe. Let's work on that together. Sound like a plan? Great. You now have a much different conversation with that driver, and a coaching program is much more effective.
Well, as the Chief Innovation Officer, like, innovation is literally your middle name, right? What do you see as the future of AI and machine learning in the trucking industry? You're at the forefront of it. Any prognostications?
Yeah, I mean, look, continuing to develop the predictive analytics is key, right? Obviously, you hear about, predictive maintenance and some of these other things, and yes, we're starting to see some of those pieces that is going to continue to develop. Predictive analytics, both inside the truck and outside of the truck, are going to continue to be at the forefront of this, so we can prevent those crashes. It has to be priority 1A. And so I think that's the biggest piece for us. Another area of what we're seeing is kind of the future is really, when you think about that total cost of risk, the biggest portion, especially for small to mid-sized fleets, is insurance. That insurance bucket is where the vast majority of your cost is sitting. And so how do you take control of that insurance conversation? It's doing the right things, but then the insurance carrier needs to know, this is not just a flash in the pan. Any improvement isn't just a lucky good year. It's a trend, and they should be able to bank on that trend, where today, now you can improve your losses year in and year out, but you're not going to see improved rates for 4 or 5 years down the road, because that's how long, that's the horizon that insurance carriers are looking back at your losses. So what we're seeing as kind of the future of both predictive analytics and safety and risk management in general is being able to give better tools to the insurance carrier to allow them to better understand your improvement as a fleet. And so that's one of the areas that we're really excited about, is being able to provide predictive analytics at the fleet level, being able to understand portfolio risk, being able to understand and see comparatively one risk, one fleet's risk compared to another, giving the insurers a much better understanding that, yes, if you're doing the right things, if you're investing in technology as a fleet and you're seeing good improvements, which I'll be honest, we are, Idelic customers see phenomenal results, 20% loss reduction on average in year one. Got a huge amount of customers that are in that 35, 40, 50% reduction in losses and accident rates in the first year. Like, those are significant and meaningful results, but it's up to the insurer to be able to understand that and give you credit for it. So now giving them tools to see and compare is super effective for not only their ability to help with risk control and underwriting, but also helps the fleets as well to kind of raise their hand and be like, look, we're doing the right things, we're seeing the right results, we should get that improvement for as well.
Well, it sounds like this is a topic that we're going to have to explore in the coming months, because it sounds like you're onto something there, and especially as it relates to the insurance carriers. So from that perspective, let's make sure that we connect on that, because that's an interesting angle, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, we do have 1 minute left, so I want to get into our deeper dive question. But honestly, I think you've kind of answered this, so maybe it's in summary. But the question is, we are getting squeezed at both ends. Rates are coming down, and our costs continue to rise. How can we stop the bleeding? You kind of touched on some of the things that they really can and should be doing.
Yeah. No, I mean, the biggest thing, especially when you talk about what's happening from a legal standpoint, when you take a claim to court and you have to deal with not even a nuclear verdict, just any verdict going to court, it's so much more about your fleet's overall safety and risk management program, as opposed to what happened in this specific case with this specific driver, right? The facts of the case are much less important. What is much more important is how your fleet operates as a whole. Are you leveraging all the data that's available to understand proactively what's happening with each and every one of your drivers? Are you coaching proactively? Are you documenting and logging that coaching? Is your coaching consistent across your entire fleet? Are you producing and providing talking points and coaching points for different types of coaching programs, whether it be defensive driving, speed management, lane departure? Are you understanding and identifying and targeting the coaching based on the actual behaviors that the driver is exhibiting, right? All of those things culminate into your safety and risk management program that gets put on display every time you have to go to court. And so now being able to have a consistency in identifying at-risk drivers beforehand, proactive and predictive, being able to assign consistent professional development plans and have those talking and coaching points automated with the task management system behind it, being able to log, track, and document those different pieces. Now, even if you get into a crash and it's not your fault, normally those turn into fair decent sized checks that you're still cutting because, the ambulance chasers are gonna chase, right? And so, but now we've had consistently documented cases with our customers being able to go in and say, no, we have everything buttoned up, tied in, it's all log, track, documented, and I can defend my program, defend my drivers. We are doing the right things. And that total cost of risk is dramatically reduced.
Well, Hayden, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm grateful for our friendship, our partnership, and I appreciate your passion and dedication to the industry.
Absolutely. Thank you as well, Jeremy. As always, it's a fantastic pleasure. You guys are doing incredibly innovative things there at DriverReach as well. So it's always a pleasure to be associated with that type of crowd, and I appreciate the time here today.
And thanks for joining me for another episode of Taking the Higher Road and for spreading the word to your industry peers. We really appreciate it. And remember, you can submit any questions or comments, including those which may appear on upcoming deeper dive segments at podcast@driverreach.com. And don't forget to rate and review Taking the Higher Road, whatever platform you use to listen. Until next time, thank you for taking the higher road.